I'm John.
I'm Rob,
And this is the Mint One Podcast.
where we talk all things NFTs and the rise of blockchain gaming.
So Rob, there's been a lot of discussion about Ledger this week.
They have. They really stirred the hornet's nest. Let's discuss.
Just a quick reminder, if you watch this on YouTube, a like and a subscribe would be fantastic. And leave us a comment, let us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, a 5-star podcast review would be fantastic. So, Rob, Ledger, it's been a interesting week.
It has. I said to you off air, there's so many layers to this, because when it was announced and the controversy kicked off, I thought, oh God, yeah, I see the problem. And then I read into it a bit and I was like, oh, I don't think I do see the problem. Like, that sounds fine. And then I looked into it a bit further and I was like, no, there's the problem. And I was like, no, actually that can be solved by that. And now I'm back to like, okay, no, there is kind of a problem. Like, there's so many layers to this issue, that at first glance, it sounded kind of a boring topic, but it's not. It really isn't.
Yeah, I think it strikes to the core of why people use hardware wallets, just how secure they are. And, you know, with Ledger being by far the number one hardware wallet provider, it was inevitable that this change that they've implemented, or update, or whatever you want to call it, was going to stir up some controversy. And it has.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion.
Yes.
Part of the problem is there's a lot of confusion. And so I've watched 2 interviews with, I should definitely have his name, Pascal Galtier. No, actually, it wasn't him. It was Charles someone. It's like the CTO. And I've watched 2 interviews with him discussing the problem and how they see it from their side, and where there's some misunderstandings. And he really nails some stuff that I think we all kind of thought. Let's start by what this is. Do you want to give an overview of what this? I don't want to call it an update. It's a service. What this service is.
So and Milk Road did a really good kind of TLDR on this. So I'm just going to be reading off one of their most recent newsletters. But effectively, Ledger have released a new service called Ledger Recover. Ledger Recover, or is it Recover or Recovery? Recover.
No, it's Recover.
Recover, great. Don't know why I just called it Recovery, but oh well, let's move on. So it's a new opt-in tool that lets users recover their private key if it gets lost. Now, if you just take, before I go on, if you just take that one sentence, you can understand why a lot of people are worried. Like, oh my God, Ledger has access to my private key and they can recover it somehow. Like this sounds like a something that shouldn't be feasible to happen. But anyway, let's keep going. So this service, Ledger Recover, encrypts the private key into 3 shards and then sends those shards to 3 different companies. The companies are Ledger, CoinCover, and Escrow Tech. Users that opt in to using Ledger Recovery, which is purely something you need to opt into. It's not a service that's provided automatically. You have to consent to it. They need to ID themselves by doing KYC checks. And the 3 companies that hold those shards will use that KYC data to verify that it's you if you ever try and use this recovery service to, quote-unquote, reconstruct your private key. It's subscription-based, costs $9 a month. It isn't supported on Nano S devices, which made a lot of people rush to try and get their hands on some of them. Thankfully, I don't know whether thankfully is the right word, but my go-to devices are Nano S's, so I'm kind of protected by this. So that's the TLDR. But the big deal is, and I'm going to use Milk Road's quotes here since they're one of the most popular newsletters in the Web3 space. They said, and I quote, "Ledger is doing the one thing it said it would never do, access customers' private keys, albeit encrypted parts of them. Plus, it's also making opted-in users KYC themselves, and everyone still has trust issues from when Ledger had their one of their customer names and address databases leaked a few years ago." So, yes, the crux of the whole issue revolves around several things. One, for the longest time, Ledger said they don't have access to seed phrases. There's no way they would have access to seed phrases. I'm not going to say whether that's true or not. It's complicated. Like pretty much everything in this whole debate, it's complex and it's difficult, and you need people much smarter than me and Rob to to really get down into the technicalities of how it all works. So there's that side of it where they've been saying for the longest time that this wouldn't be possible, and now it is.
Yeah.
And two, well, I mean that's the main one, but two, kind of as they've gone through this process, and Ledger have done countless Twitter threads, Reddit posts. The old CEO of Ledger posted on Reddit today trying to explain the entire situation. He admitted it's an absolute mess and it's a PR disaster. But they've spent a lot of time trying to explain why this isn't as bad as people think it is, and why it isn't a massive security flaw, and why it doesn't open any back doors, but nobody seems to really believe them. So
No. I'd agree. The comms was shit. But in their defense, I've now put a lot of time into trying to understand both sides of the argument and how this works and what it does. I don't know how you would condense it down into a press release that wouldn't cause this sort of storm on Twitter. It's just, there's too much nuance, and there's too many ifs, and there's too many sort of little vague sections. I think where a lot of the outrage comes from is that a lot of Ledger users didn't think it was possible for private keys to be accessed from the outside, so to speak. They thought that essentially inside their ledger is a vault with their keys in, and nobody can get into that unless they have, nobody can get into that. That's the whole point. The whole point of the hardware wallet is no one get into that. So before I come back to this, because I think there's a lot of misunderstandings. People were under misapprehensions about how a hardware wallet works. The best criticism I've seen is the one I want to start with here, because I think it gives the best overview. It's from a guy called chainlinkgod.eth. Apparently he's kind of a big deal in the Chainlink community. He's a god in the Chainlink community, so it sounds. But he just seems to have a very good handle on this. And it happened to, I think it's gone quite viral within the Web3 community, this tweet. But it happened to land on my feed, thanks Elon. And it says, Ledger, the company that has experienced multiple security breaches that exposed the personal information of hundreds of thousands of its customers, now wants you to export your private keys from your hardware wallet and give fragments to them, CoinCover, and an unknown third party, where any two can siphon funds. And to facilitate recovery, they need you to dox yourself and give even more of your personal information, allowing anyone with your identity documents, e.g. from other data breaches, to take your funds. This seems poorly. It's a funny way of saying it. So for anyone that doesn't know, it was a while ago. I had to look this up because I couldn't remember when it was. July 2020, a hacker exposed 270,000 customers' personal information, including their physical address and phone number. So not a great look. So yeah, doxing yourself to them is going to be a hard sell. As for the shard thing's interesting. The shard, the whole crux of this relies on the shard thing. So essentially, it splits your private keys, your seed phrases, into three, and then it goes three different places, and you have to access at least two to be able to get all of them. Now this is really common in Web3. This splitting of things into different different areas. It's failed before, and I'm not sure it's as foolproof as it sounds. Like, if you remember the Ronin hack, that had 9 nodes. That was like 600 million siphoned out of the Ronin sidechain. It had 9 nodes, and you needed 5 to sign a request. And the hacker managed to get the keys to 4 of them, and then backdoored the 5th. And that was 9. So, I don't love that idea. It does on paper. It seems like such a good idea. Split it in three, and then if one goes down, you've still got two fail safes. But it just means people target more. They'll target two rather than one. I don't know. I can certainly see why people are feeling a little uncomfortable about this. I won't be using it, and this is where I think the next problem comes, because my initial reaction was, and I think I even said this to you. So they're doing a non-custodial version of their hardware wallet. Okay, like as Ledger say, that they're aiming that at future customers, perhaps older generations. Like my there's no way my mum, there's no way I'd trust my mum to use a Ledger.
Sure.
It is very easy to mess up, and also people are horrendously organized most of the time. Writing down those seed phrases, putting them somewhere, there's just myriad nightmare stories of people losing the seed phrases. So this is aimed at that generation. And I thought, well, okay, if it's like a dichotomy where you have self-custodial, which is what we want to use, and we want our own key phrases, and then you have the sort of non-custodial where you can at least, it's not non-custodial, it's still self-custodial, with a failsafe. Like you can recover those if you were to lose them. So I thought, okay, well, that's fine. That is two different things. But the problem comes from one level higher, and that is that the firmware has the power to access those keys. That Ledger can do anything to get to those keys. A lot of people didn't know. And I think the firmware is... It's a big point of confusion. I think people don't... presumably, everybody has been, or everybody should be, updating the firmware on their Ledger regularly.
Yes.
That is... I was surprised that some people didn't know that firmware could affect most of their Ledger. Like, of course, security isn't like a permanent state.
Yeah.
You need to update the firmware to adjust to things and make the device more secure. So... the trust of Ledger has always been there. You've always had to trust Ledger, but I just don't think people realise that they could get to the keys with a firmware update, which they can.
Yeah.
That is exactly what that says. They can.
Yeah, I think that you've kind of touched on what I think the major kind of problem in this whole situation is. It's all just based off misunderstandings. Misunderstandings from a lot of the customer side. Then also from Ledger side, almost a misunderstanding of people's reactions and their admittedly piss poor attempts at trying to explain how any of this works. And I think since they announced it, which was several days ago from when we were recording this, their entire kind of PR or marketing strategy has just been, let's keep over-explaining and over-explaining. And they've had a few customer support people say some dumb things on Twitter and on Reddit, and it's not made people feel safe and secure, and as if they should trust Ledger. And ultimately, if you're any hardware wallet company, be it not even hardware wallet company, but any company in Web3 where you have to use your wallet to sign into a service or to interact with transactions or whatever it is, you need to trust the platforms that you're using. And Ledger has... I don't think they've meant to, but they've taken a lot of backward steps in that respect over the past few days. Just looking at the previous CEO, Eric Larchevêque, I hope that's somewhat close to the correct pronunciation. But he linked to... He basically apologized and said, hey, if I was here, I would hope this sort of thing wouldn't have happened. I made a few mistakes during my time, blah, 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 blah. It's a PR issue, etc. But he linked to a thread by another user who went through the facts about the hardware wallets and how they work. Yeah. And the top comment on that Reddit post, I think, epitomizes the situation, which is from a user called Florian995, said, and I quote, "What I learned is that I know nothing about the wallet I'm using." And that pretty much sums up a lot of the kind of the backlash here. And there's a reply to this that says a lot of people have misunderstood Ledger, stating that the seed phrase cannot be extracted as the physical hardware is what prevents this, when logically that could never be true. Everyone is acting like their ledger is now useless because of this and screaming about getting a Trezor when Trezor has a very similar recovery option. A lot of people are showing their complete lack of understanding of both the technological hardware they are using and their understanding of crypto and software, and are just jumping on board the outrage train. I don't think that might be a controversial take to some, but I don't think it's a bad look at the situation as a whole right now.
It's definitely not far off. I feel like Ledger were probably a little bit confused, right? Because they've said, okay, so you can opt into this firmware update that gives you the recover service, and then people are like, wait, you have the ability to access our keys through firmware updates.
Yep.
How can you add this in? How can you add that as a feature? And then Ledger are like, we can always do that. we just never did.
Ultimately, it's a misunderstanding of phrases like hardware wallet and things like cold storage. And that's not saying that I kind of blame the people that are outraged about this, because I don't, because I think Ledger's done an incredibly bad job of actually explaining how this works. But I think the perception from a lot of people was, hey, there's inside my Ledger device, there is a chip or some kind of storage, like some type of SSD or something, I don't know, that stores my seed phrase, and there's no way anyone can ever access that or interact with it, and it's on there, and, if I never plug my, let's say I do use it as a cold wallet, so, very, very rarely, if ever, connect it to my house, very, very rarely, if ever, connect it to the internet, use it to store your most prized NFTs or your largest bag of crypto or whatever. A lot of people think, well, hey, if I never connect it to the internet and I'd connect it very rarely, then it's very secure. Whereas, in fact, like with literally anything electronic, the second you plug it into anything that has internet access, things can be done to it. Whether it's a firmware update, a software update, like, my God, I've got half a dozen things like plugged into my PC right now. I hope my setup is secure, and I run antivirus checks and all this other stuff. So I don't think any of my machinery are compromised. But is it possible that they could be? Absolutely. Your smart fridge could be compromised. If you have a smart microwave, the possibility is there for whatever data or information is on the storage within that to be available to people. That's how modern electronics work. And I think that's a lot of people thought, Ledger devices, this just wasn't possible at all. They'd come up with some cryptographic way to obscure it all, and these sorts of interactions weren't possible, when at the end of the day it is. And this Ledger Recover service doesn't really change all too much. Although I do definitely understand why people would be annoyed about a key being sharded and then sent to third parties. That feels like the kind of thing that you should really discuss with your customers way in advance, and then get their feedback, rather than saying, hey, we're pushing a firmware update tomorrow and it's going to enable this service to anyone who wants it, because people are going to have questions, as they did here. And I think people weren't very happy that they woke up, checked Reddit, and realized that, there's a service that I can now pay for that sends my KYC info and shards my keys everywhere. I think that's what a lot of people got worked up about.
Yeah, I think the word trustlessness gets thrown around a lot.
Yes.
And I think it's become a little bit conflated with what that means. The trustlessness is in Web3 generally refers to transparency.
Yeah.
And smart contracts executions of things. It's not, companies can't be, you can't really operate in a trustless way. In fact, I looked it up. The CTO is Charles Guillemet, and I watched 2 things with him since the announcement. So he's been a busy guy doing damage control. But he's like essentially their security guy. He's CTO, but what tech are you focusing on ledger security. And he said, he was talking about that trustless thing, and he was like, it's not possible at all to store your own crypto and for it to be trustless. And he said, if you were to do that, the only way you could do that is build a full stack, like computer, develop all the software on it to run it. It's just not possible. So I think people need to shed that illusion.
Yeah, I mean,
I get that it's surprising.
Well, ultimately, if you're buying a Ledger device, you're trusting Ledger with all the same if you bought a Trezor or you bought any other hardware wallet. You have to trust them ultimately that they have your best, security needs in mind with the products and the services that they offer. So although I understand people's reticence, it's very much a case, well, if you trusted Ledger up till now, I don't think the new service, in a literal sense, changes all too much. I don't believe that Ledger has now taken a completely different direction when it comes to user security. I think they've just created a new service and severely underestimated how their customers would react to it, and then did a piss poor job of explaining how it actually works. To be fair, up to this point, not doing the best job of explaining how their hardware wallets work at all, which the ex-CEO kind of talked about in his Reddit post. Right. It was like, hey, you as customers have this impression that, we never had access to any of these things, or firmware couldn't change any of this, etc., when that just isn't true. And it isn't true for practically all hardware wallets, unless, as you say, you build your own complete stack and run your own security, which is not feasible for newcomers or even people that are in the industry. Like, do you want to buy all the hardware to run a full stack and set it all up yourself? It's difficult.
What Charles was saying is it's arguably impossible, because a lot of the software they use has been in development for, I don't know if he was exaggerating, he was like, some of the software has been being made for 50 years. Like, you can't just bang it up quickly. It's absurd. But I guess there are multiple problems here. So Ledger has done what I don't think they ever said they wouldn't do this. A lot of people are saying that. I've seen that reported in places. I don't imagine they never said that they would change anything on the firmware that would change. Perhaps they did. But this is what mass onboarding will look like. We know this. We don't have a better way at the moment. And that is unambiguously what this firmware update, optional firmware update, is for. Is for older generations and, as they put it, future customers that perhaps don't want control of everything. That's fine. So I think that bit's fine. But then you've still got the other problems. That the Chainlink God guy saying, I have to dox myself to a company that has already had a major data breach. That I get. The sharding feels like the best option perhaps that they had, but it also feels like more points of failure. I don't love that. I won't be using it. But then some people are put off just by the fact that it can happen. They don't want to. I just don't know what your alternative is, though. I really don't. I hope somebody can explain to me. Let's say these people that are outraged and no way, somebody's made a backdoor to my keys. I mean, that's not what's happened, but someone's made a backdoor to my keys. It's now possible for that firmware update to find its way onto my computer. I'm not using Ledger anymore. But like you said, it's the same gig more or less across the board. I don't know where you go or what you do to avoid that problem.
I think it's going to be very difficult for Ledger to get those customers back who are very, who have been put off by Ledger because of this. And it's, as I've already said on this podcast, me and Rob don't have the depth of technical knowledge to get, down to the metal, as I say, with why this is possibly, again, kind of stepping back a little here, but possibly not as big of a deal as people are making out. But I was just reading over the ex-CEO's statement again, and even in his words, where he admits there's been a lot of problems, I wouldn't say he goes out of his way to to say things that are likely to rile people up. But I mean, I'm just going to take a quote from his statement here. So he says, the mistake of some of the quote-unquote power user community is to become batshit crazy and start writing stuff like there is a backdoor from day one or the government has taken over Ledger. The hard truth, which has been conferred by many experts, is that nothing has changed. Absolutely nothing has changed. The security model is the same than before you knew Ledger Recover existed. What has changed is the perspective some of you had on trustlessness, which appears to be much more nuanced than you thought. And as this is a very sensible subject, many became extremely angered because they felt lied to. I understand this point of view, but it's important to also be reasonable, take a deep breath and actually think about the facts. If you think Ledger did a terrible thing by not being relentless enough on security, they've taken shortcuts, and if you thought at the time when you bought the device you would never have bought it if you had known this wasn't a fully trustless solution, then I get your point of view. But if your only take is to jump on the hate bandwagon and yell, quote, there is a backdoor when you don't have any understanding of what you're saying, then it's a free country. But at the end, the real victims will be the noobs who, in panic, will try to offload their crypto from Ledger, make stupid mistakes, and lose it all. I think if you're trying to build goodwill,
I mean,
did that a bit
but he's the
better.
ex-CEO, right? He doesn't care.
I mean, he has said in the comments, he's kind of been replying to some members of the new team, but it seems they get on well. But it's strange that he titles this post "My Personal View on the PR Disaster" and then goes on to say that.
I mean, I kind of like that post. I think he makes a lot of good points. Most people don't understand it, but then
I don't.
I don't understand how people
listening to this won't.
No, but I guess it's how far you want to go down into it. So
yeah.
we wouldn't understand how to backdoor it.
No.
But then I don't think you really need to understand to just know that everybody was wrong in thinking that you couldn't access the keys through firmware. So there's a way of software. So here are there's 2 points that we haven't covered yet that I think are relevant.
Sure.
One is what happens if. So ignorance is bliss, right? Well,
yes.
When we get these firmware updates, we're like, brilliant, that's more secure. Brilliant, that's more secure. Brilliant, that's more secure. And now we're like, okay, but it has access to the keys. So what if there's like a rogue update, or what if there's a security flaw in one of the updates that gets rolled out? Now that's gone from being annoying to potentially disastrous.
Yes,
I think that's a fair criticism to raise, right? Yeah. The other one is not my criticism; it's someone else's, but I thought it was a very good point. They were worried that they were properly on the hate bandwagon, but I think they had some sense underneath the hate. They said, don't be fooled by this being optional now. It'll be mandatory at some point, or words to those effects.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, no, that sounds a bit ridiculous. And then someone else unpacked that and said, governments will see this, and perhaps if loads of people are losing money in their constituency or whatever nation state, will say, I want this mandatory in our country. And that's when you start having problems, because that really is a slippery slope, and then there is no such thing as self-custodial.
Yeah, I think on the latter one, it's probably inevitable that not just Ledger, but other hardware wallet companies, software wallet companies, either already have been or will be approached at some point in future by government, because let's say, in this country, when the war in Ukraine kicked off, and the government wanted to seize a lot of the assets held by Russian nationals in this country. Yeah. Let's say those nationals had all of their funds in crypto. Well, the government probably still wants a way to enact sanctions on those people and, prevent them from moving money around and, trading in various assets and things. So I can understand governments wanting that control, but and this is just on me, this is my personal belief, I think at some point that is likely to happen.
That's, you've got one step above. That's, I was suggesting that they might force them to safeguard their citizens. What you're saying is the it can't be a bankless solution. They still want access. I think that would be almost the end of Web3. If they could do that would be that removes most of the benefits of cryptocurrencies.
Yes.
Like in terms of as finance, like cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, it does.
That
And I think
removes a lot of the point of them.
Ledger has been saying, all the people have been saying this is ridiculous, and of course they're going to say that. I'm not too conspiratorially minded. Like, I don't think there's anything going on in the back door right now that's not being told about us, but I can totally understand from a legislative point of view and from the point of view of governments and lawmakers, etc., that they may be interested in ways to get their hands on crypto assets that are held by people that, for whatever reason, they dislike. The same way, bank accounts can be locked down in the UK, or assets can be seized, or whatever the case may be. It's, if there's a way people can store their wealth away, whether it's in, tax havens or cryptocurrency, then people will want, or lawmakers and governments will want ways to go after those new avenues of storing your wealth away. But anyway, I think on the... Could you repeat the latter one? It was about... Oh, the last one was about that.
Yeah, the last one was about it being mandatory. What did I say before that? I don't remember.
But in any case, I think what I'd like to touch on real quick is a lot of this has brought up questions from people about, okay, can we trust any hardware wallets? What does this mean for my sense of ownership? The general security of my cryptocurrency and my NFTs. And I think it goes back to, for example, in the real world scenario, if I bank with Barclays, I don't, but as an example, if I did, then I have to trust Barclays that they'll hold my money and give my money to me when I ask for it. That is, in a sense, the same way wallets work, whether it's software or hardware. If I have a MetaMask wallet and then I don't know, let's say I buy 2 ETH, then I have to trust that MetaMask will facilitate that transaction if I go to OpenSea and try to buy an NFT that's worth half an ETH. So it's how do you perceive the sense of ownership? It's the same as how people perceive trustlessness in this situation, where I think a lot of people's concept of what ownership and trustlessness is different to what it actually is. I would say my cash money that's in my bank, I own that money. That's how I would think, even though it's stored by a third party. I don't have stacks of cash in my apartment. I don't have paper money. No, I don't. But so this is when you really get to the crux of the issues with the issues that the community has had with what's happened with Ledger this week, and it's made people kind of take a step back and I guess reconsider just how trustless and how ownership centric the crypto space is, because it doesn't seem to be as, or at least from the community's point of view, doesn't seem to be as trustless and open source and as people thought. But I mean, as we've said, nothing's really changed. If you trust Ledger, I mean, yes, there are concerns as to why you might not trust Ledger that have lost customer data before. But if you trusted Ledger up to this point, there doesn't seem to be, at least from the way I see it, too much of a reason to not trust them. If you don't want to use the Ledger recovery service, and I would totally understand why, just don't use it. I don't know what your take is on that.
I mean, it's basically that. I won't be using it. The news that firmware can get in that little vault in my Ledger is new to me, but it's not new. No. That's always been the case, so I guess I kind of have to accept that. As for the concerns over, this could become mandatory. There's an old stand-up from Jimmy Carr. he made a joke about a sign that showed huge falling boulders, and he's like, "What am I meant to do with that information?" Because I mean, you're just going to get squashed or you don't get squashed. I mean, there's nothing you can do that. So it's the same thing with this. Like a lot of this, I mean, what am I doing with the information? I'm not changing anything. I don't know where to move crypto to that would be safer, self-custodial and safer. I think all hardware wallets have firmware that presumably, I really imagine this is true across the board. So unless someone innovates and finds a way of but I mean, what's the point? The whole point of a hardware wallet, what is the firmware doing other than, you've got the apps there for different cryptocurrencies.
Yep.
And then you've got the security side of things. Mm-hmm. It's not a complex device in terms of usability.
No.
It really only has one purpose. So the firmware updates are going to be security. It's just, I don't know how this is really actionable other than not opting to go in for the recoverer service, which I won't be doing. And it's just such a difficult one. There's so many layers to this, and there's so many hypotheticals. They could get hacked. People didn't know that they were as vulnerable as perhaps they are, even though it's not really that vulnerable. And there's no such thing as trustlessness when it comes to this kind of thing. And like you were talking about banks, as if not you, and this isn't a shot at you. I'm saying people say people feel comfortable putting their money in Barclays, but people feel comfortable putting their money in Northern Rock,
and Silicon Valley and Silvergate and the rest of them,
Or look at Greece, there's a million examples where you can get your own cash out of your own bank. So nothing's really different here. There is trust involved. I generally trust Ledger. I like my Ledger device. I will keep using it, and I won't have the recover feature on it. Am I a little bit more on edge about it than I was? Perhaps.
Yes.
I was also naive. I didn't think you could install firmware that right. So this is one little element we haven't, I guess, unpacked properly. Is that right now, as I understand it, your firmware cannot access your seed phrases, but the issue is that they can install firmware that can remotely as well, obviously. So right now there isn't a way into my Nano device that can get into a little vault and take my seed phrases and then my money, but it is possible to have firmware that would do that. I think you're actually going to see people not updating any firmware from. I think there'll be a lot of people that don't update, which could be catastrophic if down the line someone finds a flaw in whatever the most recent version is.
But again, in either case, you have to trust that Ledger's security, even if you decide to not update the firmware, you have to trust that Ledger's security up till then is okay and there's no flaws in it.
Exactly.
So
and then if you can't do that.
If you don't update and then your devices are compromised, then
you can't, presumably you can't accidentally install this firmware because you have to upload ID and stuff to register for it.
Yeah, well, I think for the firmware, as long as you have your Ledger plugged into a device and you open Ledger Live, you can choose to update your firmware. But for the
to the recover version.
Well, yes, but if you wanted to use Ledger Recover, you'd go through a separate KYC process, etc. So they're not enforcing KYC on anyone yet, which is it's very strange. A lot of the people in the Ledger camp have been saying, "Oh, I understand people might not want to use the service. I won't be using it personally." Well, I think, that's almost sounds like you don't have faith in your own new system.
I think it's just, but it's kind of you're between a rock and a hard place, aren't you? Because if they said I'm going to be using this recover thing, people were like, "Aren't you like a crypto bro? Like, are you going to be technologically minded? Why are you using non-custodial?" And then if they say, "Oh no, I still want custody of my own," and then you're like, "Well, don't you trust your service?" Like they can't win.
Well, I remember distinctly listening to Ledger's one of the first Ledger Twitter Spaces they did on the day that this news came out, and one person came up, I can't remember their name, and they're like, hey, can you be honest about like the new attack vectors, and does this compromise my device in any way? And I say for a good amount of time, they're like, hey, it doesn't introduce any new attack vectors, blah, 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 blah. The guy cut in and said, well, hey, if I use this ledger recovery service, I'm uploading KYC, surely that introduces new attack vectors. And they were like, oh, yeah, if you use our service, and it introduces theoretical attack vectors, but there's no attack vectors in the hardware itself, which, it bugs me.
I hadn't heard the term attack vectors as much as I have in the last 3 days. It's mad. That is such an obscure phrase, and I just keep hearing it. But, I mean, you can't argue. It has.
Yeah.
Of course it has. You can't add more complexity to something without adding more potential vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
I mean, it's simple as that, surely.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, anyone who uses any hardware wallet, doesn't matter what it is using it because they want their assets to be safe. They could have $50 in crypto, they could have 500k. At the end of the day, they just want their crypto, their NFTs, their assets to be secure. Has what Ledger have done with this update and the way they've communicated impacted the way people feel about the security of their Ledger devices? Yes. Has it, in a theoretical sense, and if you don't decide to use the service, put or made any changes that actually made your device less secure? I would err on the side of no. If you decide to use Ledger Recover and you have to use KYC, then yes. Should people try and understand more about the devices they're using? Yes, although admittedly in Ledger's case, and to be fair with wider crypto, if we want mass onboarding, mass market, etc., we have to make these things easier for people, and we have to give them ways to recover their assets if for whatever reason they lose their, their seed phrase, their keys, whatever. So that's pretty much it, really.
I'm going to ask you one question to conclude.
Sure.
I'm not necessarily focusing on the brand here, but is the Ledger cold wallet still the safest way to store your own crypto, do you think?
I'm not going to focus on Ledger, but I'll say for hardware wallets more generally, are your assets more secure if you use a hardware wallet than if you use a software wallet?
Or an exchange. A lot of people store that.
You really shouldn't be storing your assets on exchanges.
That is bottom tier,
that's
for sure.
Rule number one: if you have any substantial amount of crypto, please do not store it on exchanges.
Get it off the exchange. Look how many have gone under. Please, stop it.
Bottom rung on the ladder is exchanges. If you don't have a hardware wallet, software wallet's next best thing, right? Get up your MetaMask and go stick all your crypto and your NFTs in that.
Can I just throw in a caveat there?
Sure.
If you're well organized and you're organized and won't lose track of things, spread them. Spread your assets across multiple hot wallets, software wallets. So have multiple MetaMasks if possible, or just spread it out a little bit. Don't have all your eggs in one basket, because it's so. How many times have we seen in the last couple of years people on Twitter saying, lost access to my MetaMask, lost all my crypto?
Yeah,
I've seen it at least every month and a half, 2 months probably.
Yeah, just
don't do that.
Whether it's with software or hardware wallets, if you've got any substantial amount of assets,
spread it.
Yeah, just spread them. But yes,
just spread them.
But I mean, at the end of the day, your question is: are hardware wallets more secure than software wallets?
Yes,
and the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Whether you use a Ledger or a Trezor or something more niche. Yes, your assets are more secure with a hardware wallet than they are with software. Why? Well, because your device, unless you have it physically plugged into something, is offline. If you use MetaMask, then in theory, and again, a lot of this is just purely hypothetical, theoretical stuff, then there is far more attack vectors, to use that phrase again. Whereas with a hardware wallet, there's far less. Do you have to trust whoever is providing you with your hardware wallet? Yes, you have to trust Ledger and you have to trust Trezor, because at the end of the day, They're their devices. If people thought that this ledger update is not being done with the best security vectors in mind for everybody, then what the hell did they think 6 months ago? Like, up till now, you get a device shipped to you by Ledger that has a chip on it with their code on. Theoretically, that code can do anything Ledger wants to, yet you've trusted them up to this point that they've built it with your security, your keys, your assets and your security in mind. Same goes for Trezor, same goes for MetaMask, Bitski, whoever it is. And it boils down to that, really. If you trust that these companies have your best interests at heart, you have nothing to worry about. I can understand if your confidence has been knocked. If it has, go look at other options. But I still think that at the end of the day, you're much better off using a hardware wallet from any number of providers than you are just using a software wallet or sticking your crypto on an exchange like a lunatic.
Yeah. I have nothing really to add other than I reckon if someone were to mute this podcast and watch your last rant on mute, it would look as if you're dropping a rap album. That would be my... it occurred to me halfway through. When you're... Because in case anyone doesn't know, Johnny's currently standing rather than sitting.
My PC's fixed for anyone who's been wondering about that. So 6 months after it broke.
Gesticulation is far more profound when you're standing.
It is. So
I liked it. It was a passionate speech, and I have nothing to add to that. It's been a complex and tiring episode.
It has. And please, for anyone who just listened to my rant or this episode in general, go and do more research if this is something that you're worried about. Me and Rob are not experts. Sure. The Ledger staff have said all sorts of other things, but there's tons of independent, posts and Twitter threads and whatever it is that you can go and look up. So go and read that if you want some more reassurance or you want to really decide whether Ledger is right for you or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially all we did all we do with any story that breaks is deep dive it. We read every thread and any technological person that breaks it down. I've read probably 10 different Twitter threads from people who are well respected. I've listened to 2 interviews with Charles Guillemet, who's the CTO of Ledger. I've read multiple articles on CoinDesk and Cointelegraph, and I mean, that's all you can do is just educate yourself as much as possible. The only thing I would warn you is that there does feel like quite a low ceiling of information. I feel like everything we've given you, you're going to get in a million different ways, and then you're going to hit a kind of roof. Because this is one thing we should just throw in right at the end, is that a lot of people are pressuring them to make this code open source and to make it more trustless. I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know. I don't really think it changes much. But
in one of the threads, one of the Twitter posts that the ex-CEO of Ledger linked to, he has a very short sentence on this, which says, "Open source is somewhat of a solution, but only in 2 cases. One, you can read and check the software that gets published, compile the software and use that. Or 2, you wait 6 months and hope someone else has checked things out before clicking on update."
Yeah, exactly.
So.
And the people that are suggesting it's some sort of measure to like a safeguard against Ledger doing something dishonest, or I think that what's the point? If you're not going to trust, you're just not going to trust anyone. What's the point? You need to build your own stack. So good luck.
I think the best way to wrap it up is just with the end of that same Twitter thread. Not Twitter thread, Reddit post that I was just quoting. It says, in the end, the truth is that it's all about trust. Who do you trust? How do you verify that trust? The reality is that people do not verify. Go buy a wallet from people that you can trust, air gap if possible, and don't update the firmware unless it's well checked, and give it a few months if you have any concerns. At the end of the day, that's all you can do. And just hope that there's competent people doing the security and that you're buying your devices from companies you can trust. And that's it.
Cool.
Great.
Okay. So...
rant over.
Hopefully did we quell any fears? Did we make it worse or what? Let us know, please.
Yeah, if you have any thoughts on that, or it'd be very interesting to hear your guys' takes. There's been a couple of people in at least the NFT Insider Discord that have been discussing this over the past few days. So yeah, go let us know in our Discords and on our various social medias. It's at Mint1Pod on Twitter. Of course, if you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe would be great. Just comment with your thoughts. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, a 5-star podcast review would be great. But other than that, Rob, where can we find you?
You can find me at tokengamer.io, where we've got daily blockchain gaming news. We have an enormous giveaway that is coming up. I think I'm launching it with the next few days of recording this, so it may be up when this goes live. It's a big one, and no one knows it's coming yet, this giveaway, so it's quite cool. There's a lot of, I'll give you a clue, it's keys to get into a game, and that game is going to be running a tournament with a lot of money on the line to be earned. So
exciting.
Look out for that. Token Gamer app still being a pain in our ass as we fix various bugs and things. It should be working perfectly now. If you have any problems with it, please let us know. We are fixing the notification bug because it wasn't always doing push notifications, which is our favorite feature. Anything else to look at? LinkedIn, we're on LinkedIn. We're posting there quite a lot. Come find us there. Twitter at Token Gamer News. Yeah, that'll do. John?
Okay, so for the latest Web3 news, NFT news, gaming news, etc., it's nftinsider.io or at nftinsider_io on Twitter and Instagram are the two main ones. They're on a bunch of other platforms as well. For me personally, it's at hydropowered, HYDROPWRD on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Clubhouse, Reddit, some other ones as well. Twitter is, I don't think on AOL.
Ask Jeeves?
Not Ask Jeeves. RuneScape. You can get me there, although you have to input all the rest of the vowels that I've taken out the second half of.
Sure.
But yeah, you can find me everywhere. Twitter's the best one. Tweet at me, let me know your thoughts on this whole Ledger debacle.
Okay.
I think that is it for episode 65 of the Moment Podcast. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. As we said, like, subscribe, 5-star podcast review, comment, blah blah blah, all that good stuff. And we hope you guys tune in again next week.